The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and paper, like time itself had been folded and pressed into these walls. I sat there, hands clasped tightly in my lap, the faint tremor of my pulse betraying the calm expression I tried to hold. Across the room, Nathan Corwin reclined in his chair with the same effortless arrogance he'd worn since the funeral. My brother, or at least the man who used to be. He caught my eye, offered a smirk that barely curled the edge of his mouth, and whispered something to his attorney that made him laugh quietly. It was a sound I'd come to know too well. Mockery wrapped in charm. Beside me, Henry Vale, my lawyer and the closest thing to a friend I had left, leaned forward slightly and whispered, "You don't have to look at him, Isabel." But I did. Because that smirk, so full of victory, was exactly why I was here. A few weeks earlier, we'd both stood by our mother's graveside. Lydia Corwin had been the center of our small world, a woman whose warmth could fill a room and whose words always seemed to carry a quiet kind of power. She had painted until her hands trembled too much to hold a brush, and in every canvas, I swore I could see love hidden in the colors. Nathan, on the other hand, had seen only opportunity. When the will was first read, the air in the attorney's office had turned brittle. Nathan's name had appeared again and again, property, shares, even the lake house. My name appeared once, just once, a modest sum. Enough to appear generous, but nowhere near what I knew my mother had promised me years ago. Henry had stayed silent as I read through the pages, his brow tightening just slightly. "This doesn't look right," he'd murmured. "It feels edited." Edited. That was the word that started it all. I confronted Nathan that very night. He'd been sitting on the back porch of our mother's house, swirling a glass of whiskey, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the lake. When I told him what I suspected, he didn't deny it. "Not really." He just smiled. "Isabel," he said softly, "you always did live in stories. Mother knew I could handle things better than you. She just made it official." The way he said it, calm, deliberate cut, deeper than if he'd shouted. I remember leaving the house and standing in the driveway, my mother's wind chime singing in the cold night air. It sounded different now. Hollow. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lydia had left something behind, something Nathan didn't know about. That's when Eleanor Ridge came to see me. She'd worked for my mother for over 20 years, first as a housekeeper, then more like a companion. She arrived at my door clutching an old scarf of my mother's, her eyes watery and restless. "Miss Isabel," she began, "your mother," she said, "if things ever felt wrong, to look where the light breaks twice." I frowned, unsure if she was rambling or recalling something real, but the way her hands trembled told me it mattered. 2 days later, I drove back to my mother's house, long emptied out by Nathan's lawyers. The smell of turpentine and lavender still lingered faintly in her old studio. I stood by the window, where she'd painted her last piece a sunrise over the very lake that had reflected her whole life back at her. And that's when I noticed it. The frame wasn't quite flush against the wall. A sliver of light broke twice across its edge when the sun hit it. Just right. Behind the canvas, tucked carefully in a thin wooden pocket, was a sealed envelope. My mother's handwriting, familiar, graceful, unmistakable, spelled my name. Isabel. I didn't open it then. My hands shook too much, and my heart thudded so loudly I could barely think. I took it straight to Henry. When we unfolded the letter, silence filled his office like a tide pulling out to sea. The letter wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but what it said changed everything. Henry looked at me over the paper, his voice quiet. "If this is what it appears to be," he said, "your brother's been lying to everyone, including the court." Now, sitting here under the harsh courtroom lights, that letter sat sealed once again inside Henry's worn leather briefcase. I hadn't told Nathan we found it. Let him think he'd won. Judge Holbrook entered, his robe flowing like a shadow down the aisle. The bailiff called for order, and all the small murmurs died away. Nathan's lawyer, Mr. Kane, a man who seemed born for smirking, rose first. Your Honor, we move to close proceedings today with final recognition of my client, Mr. Nathan Corwin, as the sole heir of Lydia Corwin's estate. The will speaks for itself. Henry rose calmly, buttoning his jacket. If only it did, Your Honor, he said evenly. We have evidence that the will presented was not, in fact, the final document our client's mother left behind. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Nathan shifted, his smirk fading just slightly. Judge Holbrook looked over his glasses. Evidence? Henry nodded, then turned to me. For a moment, the entire room disappeared the air, the people, even Nathan's cold gaze. I saw only my mother's face, soft and distant, her voice whispering across memory. Look where the light breaks twice. Henry placed the envelope on the judge's bench with quiet reverence. A letter, he said, handwritten and dated 2 weeks after the contested will. It was hidden in a location known only to Mrs. Corwin and discovered by my client, Isabel Corwin, following specific instructions left to her. Nathan's voice cut through the silence. That's absurd. A letter? Anyone could forge. Judge Holbrook lifted a hand. Mr. Corwin, you'll have your chance to speak. For now, I'll read. As the judge broke the seal and unfolded the paper, I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Nathan leaned forward, that old smirk flickering back to life. This won't change anything, he whispered. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't answer him, because deep down, I knew it would. And as the judge began to read my mother's words aloud, I saw Nathan's smirk falter just a crack at first, like glass under strain. He didn't know it yet, but that letter was about to tear apart every lie he'd ever told. The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the faint rustle of paper sounded like thunder. Judge Holbrook adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud, his voice steady, deliberate. To my children, Isabel and Nathan, he read, if this letter has found its way to the light, it means my final wishes were not honored as I intended. Nathan's smirk twitched, a muscle in his cheek tightening. I kept my eyes on him not out of anger, but out of something deeper. Sadness, perhaps. The kind that comes when you finally see the person you once loved for who they truly are. Judge Holbrook continued, Isabel, you were always my still water, quiet, reflective, and strong. Nathan, my flame bright, restless, and too easily swayed by the wind. I loved you both, but I know how temptation can twist love into something unrecognizable. The judge paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. Henry folded his hands on the table, his calm gaze fixed on the bench. If there is a dispute over what I left behind, the letter went on, know this. The true record of my will is sealed in the cedar chest beneath my easel. Only my signature, written in blue ink, carries my intent. Any version, written in black, was drawn under pressure I could not speak of at the time. I heard the sharp inhale from Nathan's lawyer. It was the sound of a man realizing the ground beneath him had just cracked open. Nathan's smirk had vanished. He shifted in his seat, the charm stripped away, leaving behind a face I barely recognized. Anxious, cornered, furious. Your Honor, his lawyer began, standing abruptly. This so-called letter, there's no proof it wasn't written earlier. We can't confirm the authenticity. Judge Holbrook raised a hand. You'll have the opportunity to cross-examine. Sit down. Mr. Kane hesitated, then obeyed. The judge continued reading. Nathan, my dear boy, if you are the one who finds this letter, I ask only one thing. Let truth stand, even if pride falls. I have loved you, despite the choices you've made, but I cannot let deceit define our family's name. I felt something in me crumble then. My mother's words so gentle, so full of grace, even as they unveiled betrayal pierced deeper than anger ever could. Nathan's face had turned pale. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering rapidly, his hands fidgeting with his cufflinks. When the judge finished, the courtroom stayed utterly still. Then Judge Halbrook looked up, his expression unreadable. This letter, he said, is dated 2 weeks after the contested will. It clearly refers to a document written in blue ink. Mr. Vale, do you have evidence to corroborate this claim? Henry rose, calm as ever. Yes, Your Honor. The cedar chest mentioned in the letter was recovered from Mrs. Corwin's art studio 2 days ago, unopened. Inside was a sealed envelope containing a revised will signed and dated in blue ink. We've submitted copies to the court. Nathan shot up. This is insane, he barked. She must have forged it. My mother, she would never. His voice broke on the last word. Judge Halbrook's tone stayed even. Mr. Corwin, sit down. Outbursts will not help your case. For a moment, Nathan didn't move. Then, slowly, he sank back into his chair, his chest heaving. Henry continued, Your Honor, the revised will matches the handwriting of Mrs. Corwin precisely. It was verified by a handwriting expert this morning. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Nathan's lawyer rubbed his temples, muttering something under his breath. As the clerk distributed copies of the letter and the new will, I looked down at my hands. They were trembling not with fear, but with release. For the first time since my mother's passing, I felt like I could finally breathe. When Judge Halbrook reviewed the new document, his eyes softened, just barely. This version leaves the Corwin estate equally divided, he said. Each child receives half, with the instruction that the family foundation continue under joint oversight. Half. That's all I had ever wanted, fairness. Truth. Nathan, however, didn't see fairness. He saw loss. His jaw tightened. She didn't mean it, he muttered. She must have been confused. She was ill. She didn't know what she was signing. Henry's voice cut through the air. Mrs. Corwin was lucid when she wrote that letter, as confirmed by her nurse, Eleanor Ridge, who witnessed her signing the new will. Eleanor, sitting quietly in the second row, raised a trembling hand. I remember it clearly, she said softly. She told me, the truth will wait, even if I can't. Nathan's eyes flicked toward her cold, accusing. But Eleanor didn't flinch. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Because beneath all the lies and the anger, I knew Nathan hadn't started as a villain. He'd been my mother's golden boy, the one who made her laugh when her hands ached too much to paint. But greed, once it enters a heart, grows roots fast. Judge Halbrook leaned back in his chair. Given the evidence, we will recess until tomorrow to verify the authenticity of the revised will. He struck his gavel lightly, and the sound echoed like the end of an era. As people began to rise, Nathan turned to me. His voice was low, dangerous. You think this changes everything? You think you've won? I stood slowly, my hands steady now. No, Nathan, I said quietly. I think Mom finally did. For a brief second, the mask slipped. I saw something flicker in his eyes, not rage, not arrogance, but fear. Henry touched my shoulder. Let's go, he murmured. We stepped out into the courthouse hallway, the sunlight pouring through the high windows. I tilted my face toward it, remembering my mother's words. Look where the light breaks twice. It wasn't just about the painting or the letter. It was about truth, the way it always finds a way through darkness, no matter how many shadows it has to pass. Henry's voice broke my thoughts. "You know," he said softly, "your mother would be proud of you." I smiled faintly. I think she already knew this moment was coming. He nodded, his eyes kind. "Then, tomorrow, we finish what she started." Behind us, through the glass doors, I caught one last glimpse of Nathan pacing the courtroom floor, his composure gone, his hands shaking. The man who once smirked in victory now looked small, trapped by his own lies. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall courthouse windows like liquid gold, falling in soft stripes across the benches. It should have felt warm, comforting, but all I could feel was tension hanging in the air like invisible smoke. The second day of the hearing had drawn a larger crowd. Word had spread that Nathan Corwin, the charming businessman with the perfect smile, might have forged his own mother's will. Reporters filled the back rows, pens scratching like insects. Henry leaned toward me, his tone quiet but steady. "Stay calm. Today, everything becomes clear." I nodded, though my fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Calm wasn't easy when every breath felt like borrowed air. Across from us, Nathan sat rigid in his chair, his confidence fractured but not gone. He had a new tie, a darker one, and the faint smirk had returned thinner now, sharpened by desperation. He wouldn't go down quietly. Judge Halbrook entered the courtroom, the gavel striking once. "Let's proceed." Henry stood. "Your Honor, before continuing with yesterday's evidence, we have one additional submission. A recorded statement from the late Lydia Corwin, discovered on a USB drive inside the cedar chest with her final will." Nathan's head jerked toward him. "What?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "A recorded statement?" "Yes, Your Honor," Henry replied calmly. "Mrs. Corwin anticipated possible disputes and recorded this message 2 days before her passing. We have verified both the date and the authenticity." Nathan's lawyer shot up. "We object. This is unverified hearsay. There's no way to prove." Henry cut in smoothly. "The file metadata and signature verification from the notary on record confirm its authenticity. It meets evidentiary standards." Judge Halbrook studied both men. "Objection overruled. Play the recording." Henry nodded to the technician, and the faint hum of speakers filled the courtroom. Then my mother's voice, soft, fragile but steady, echoed through the hall. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye properly. Isabel, Nathan, my children. I want you both to know that my heart has never belonged to one more than the other, but truth must belong to both." A tremor went through me. Hearing her voice again, it was like being pulled backward in time. I could almost see her sitting at her easel, sunlight touching her silver hair. "Nathan, I know you've struggled. I saw it in the way you spoke about money, success, power, as if they could fill the quiet inside you. I never blamed you for that hunger. But when you came to me with that lawyer, asking me to simplify the estate, I realized you no longer saw family as something to protect, but something to possess." Nathan's jaw tightened. "You told me Isabel didn't need much, that she had always been content. You said giving her less would only keep her humble. And maybe you even believed that. But I couldn't let you take what wasn't yours." A few gasps rippled through the room. Nathan's lawyer buried his face in his hands. "So, I rewrote my will. And I left something else. Something that can't be divided by money. Nathan, if you're listening, I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequence. It only opens the door for change if you choose to walk through it." The recording ended with a faint click, followed by silence so complete it almost hummed. Nathan looked as if the ground had been pulled from under him. He stared straight ahead, lips slightly parted, eyes unfocused. For a moment, he didn't even blink. Then he laughed, a low, brittle sound that broke into something close to anger. So, that's it? My mother's guilt trip from beyond the grave? He rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You think a letter and a video can change what's legal? You think anyone's going to take your side when Judge Halbrook slammed the gavel down hard. Mr. Corwin, sit down. But Nathan didn't. His voice rose, cracking with panic. She was manipulated by her, by Isabel. She's always been the favorite, always pretending to be innocent, while she took everything I deserved. I stayed seated, calm, my hands folded neatly. All I took, Nathan, I said softly, was the truth. The courtroom seemed to freeze around us. Judge Halbrook motioned to the bailiff. Mr. Corwin, one more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Nathan slowly sank back into his seat, but his eyes, dark wild, never left mine. Henry cleared his throat. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. We've provided evidence of forgery, motive, and now the deceased's own recorded statement. I believe that speaks for itself. Judge Halbrook looked down at his papers for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he said, I'll issue a preliminary ruling after recess. Until then, both parties are dismissed. The gavel struck again, and people began to rise, but Nathan didn't move. He sat there, still as stone, as if he couldn't quite believe it was happening. Henry gathered the files quietly. It's over, he murmured. He can't escape this. The truth is too loud. I turned toward him, my voice low. It's strange, Henry. I thought I'd feel triumphant. But all I feel is tired. He nodded. That's what justice feels like sometimes. Quiet. As we walked toward the doors, Eleanor Ridge appeared in the hallway holding a small package. Her eyes were red but kind. I found this, she said, her voice trembling. In your mother's studio, hidden in the same chest. She must have meant for you to have it, Isabel. Inside the worn wrapping was a small journal. My mother's handwriting covered the first page. For Isabel. Because love is the only inheritance worth fighting for. I felt my throat tighten as tears welled up. Nathan brushed past us, suddenly his shoulder colliding with mine. He didn't speak. He didn't look back. Just walked down the hallway, fast, like a man trying to outrun the sound of his own name. Henry touched my arm gently. Let him go, he said. He has to find his own way through what he's done. I nodded, still staring at the journal. Mom knew, I whispered. She knew this would happen. Henry smiled faintly. Mothers usually do. Outside, the sunlight was bright and sharp. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing it in, feeling for the first time like the world had exhaled with me. The battle for the inheritance had ended. But the real victory wasn't in the property or the money, it was in my mother's letter, her voice, her faith in truth. Nathan had smirked in court, certain he had stolen everything. But what he could never steal was the one thing that lasted longer than greed, her love, written in ink that never faded. And as I closed the journal, I realized that this quiet piece was the true inheritance she had left me. The verdict came 3 days later. The courtroom was half full that morning, but the tension felt as dense as stone. Reporters sat ready, pens poised. Nathan Corwin walked in wearing the same dark suit from the first day, but the arrogance he'd worn like armor was gone. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. I didn't feel hate as I looked at him, just a strange, deep ache. Grief for what we'd both lost, not just money or a house, but something that had once been whole and now could never be mended. Judge Halbrook entered, his robe rustling softly as he took his seat. The bailiff called for silence. Henry leaned slightly toward me. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "you did right by your mother." I nodded, my heart steady. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. The judge cleared his throat and began. After careful review of the evidence, testimony, and documentation, this court finds that the contested will presented by Mr. Nathan Corwin was fraudulently altered and is hereby invalidated. The original revised will, dated and signed by Mrs. Lydia Corwin in blue ink, will stand as the lawful final testament. A murmur spread across the room. Nathan's head sank into his hands. The judge continued. Furthermore, given the evidence of document manipulation, the court will refer the matter to the district attorney for review of potential criminal charges. However, sentencing will be left to the state's discretion. Nathan's lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, if I may..." Judge Halbrook raised his hand. "No, Mr. Kane, your client's actions speak clearly enough." And with that, the gavel came down. One sharp sound final, echoing like the closing of a long and painful chapter. Nathan didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the polished wood of the defense table. The smirk that once seemed glued to his face was gone for good. Henry gathered the papers quietly, his voice low. "It's done." But I couldn't move right away. My hands were clasped together, resting on the table, and for a moment, I just watched Nathan, the boy who used to chase fireflies by the lake, who used to sit beside me while Mother painted, telling stories and laughing until the stars came out. What had happened to him? When had love turned into envy so fierce it hollowed him out? He finally looked up, his eyes red, and met mine. For the first time, there was no defiance there, only exhaustion. "I thought she loved you more," he said softly. I shook my head. "She loved us both, Nathan. You just never believed it." He opened his mouth as if to speak again, but closed it. His lawyer touched his shoulder, urging him to leave. He stood slowly, his steps heavy, and walked toward the exit. For a brief second, I thought he might turn around, say something, anything. But he didn't. He just left. When the door shut behind him, the silence that followed was almost tender. Outside the courthouse, autumn leaves skittered across the steps. Henry and I walked out together, the crisp wind tugging at our coats. He smiled gently. "Justice is rare, Isabel, but today, it found its way." I nodded. "It wasn't justice I wanted," I said quietly. "Just the truth." He looked at me with that kind, steady gaze that never wavered. "Then maybe that's why you found both." We parted ways at the corner. He went to his car, and I walked toward the lake. It was only a few blocks away, the same lake that bordered the old Corwin estate, where everything had started and ended. The water shimmered under the pale sun, ripples scattering the reflection of the trees. I sat on the bench my mother used to favor, the one facing the willow that dipped its branches into the water like a painter's brush. I pulled the small journal from my bag, the one Eleanor had given me, and opened it again. My mother's handwriting filled the pages. Loops, curls, small flourishes that felt alive even now. If you're reading this, Isabel, then truth has already done what love alone could not. Don't let your brother's anger harden your heart. Forgive him not because he deserves it, but because you do. I traced the ink with my fingertips, a lump forming in my throat. "Forgiveness," she'd written, "is the only way to stop grief from becoming inheritance." A tear slipped down my cheek before I realized it. Behind me, footsteps approached. I turned to see Eleanor Ridge, her wool coat buttoned tight against the wind. "You came here often with her?" she said softly. I nodded. She said the lake helped her think. Eleanor smiled faintly. She used to say that truth lives in reflection. You just have to look long enough to see it looking back. For a while, we just sat there, two women bound by memories of the same gentle soul. I don't hate him, I said quietly. I thought I would, but I don't. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes glistening. Then your mother's work is done. She stood and left me with the breeze and the rippling water. As the sun began to lower, I opened my mother's journal one last time. On the final page, written in smaller, trembling letters, was one simple line: Love will outlive the will. I smiled through the tears, closing the book against my heart. Nathan could have every possession, every dollar, every stone from that house, and it wouldn't matter, because I had what he could never steal: peace. Later that evening, as I walked home, I passed the old Corwin estate. Its windows were dark now, empty, but the faint outline of my mother's studio was still visible through the trees. The place where she painted, where she forgave, where she hid the letter that saved us all. And as the wind carried the last light of day across the lake, I heard her voice again, not in memory, but in truth. Look where the light breaks twice, Isabel. That's where love hides. I stopped and turned toward the water. The sun broke through the clouds once, then again, its reflection trembling on the ripples. And, for the first time, I truly understood. It rained the next morning. The kind of rain that didn't pour, didn't thunder, just fell quietly, as though the sky itself were grieving. I hadn't seen Nathan since the verdict. Word spread quickly that he'd left town, though no one knew where. Henry said the investigators were following up, but he doubted there would be any trial. Your mother's letter carried too much grace, he said. The court saw that. They'll let him go with fines and public shame. I nodded. Justice was already done. The rest was his to carry. Still, I found myself thinking about him more than I expected what he must have felt. Alone, stripped of the empire he'd tried to build out of deceit. My brother had always wanted recognition, not love. And yet, even now, I couldn't stop wishing he'd find the one thing he never seemed to understand: peace. A week later, as I sat in my mother's old studio sorting through her canvases, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, Nathan stood there. He looked smaller somehow. His once pristine hair was damp from the rain, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "You're still here." "I live here now," I replied softly. It felt right. He nodded, glancing past me into the room. His gaze lingered on the easel, on the half-finished painting of the lake our mother never completed. "She always said she'd finish that one when the light was right," he murmured. I let him in. He walked slowly, as though afraid to disturb the air. "She would have wanted you to come," I said. He laughed quietly, a hollow sound. "I doubt that." "No," I said gently. "She would have. She believed in forgiveness more than fairness." He looked down at his hands. "I don't deserve it, Isabel." For a moment, I saw not the man who smirked in court, not the brother who forged her will, but the boy who used to chase dragonflies through the meadow behind our house, calling my name when he found one too beautiful to catch. "You don't have to deserve it," I said. "You just have to accept it." He looked up then, and his eyes shimmered with something raw. "I thought I could control everything," he said. "But when Mom's voice played in that courtroom, it was like she was right there looking at me. I didn't realize how much I missed her until that moment." I smiled faintly. "You didn't just miss her, Nathan. You forgot her. There's a difference." He nodded, unable to argue. "I went to the lake yesterday," he said after a long pause. It looked the same as when we were kids. I stood there for hours, trying to feel something other than shame. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. Then maybe you've already started to heal. For the first time in years, he didn't pull away. We sat for a while in silence, surrounded by the scent of oil paint and the faint hum of rain against the windows. Then he looked toward the easel again. You think she'd want me to finish it? I smiled softly. Maybe she wanted us to finish it together. He blinked, surprised, and then gave a small, almost broken laugh. You'd let me? She already forgave you, Nathan. The least I can do is follow her lead. For the next few hours, we worked in quiet rhythm. The rain faded, the light changed, and for the first time, I saw my brother not as the man who betrayed me, but as the boy I'd once trusted. His brushstrokes were hesitant at first, then steadier. Mine followed, filling the canvas with color. By the time the sun began to set, the painting was almost complete, a lake bathed in twilight. The sky breaking open in gold and silver, light reflecting twice upon the water. Where the light breaks twice, Nathan whispered. That's what she meant, isn't it? I nodded. Truth and love, both shining even through darkness. We stood together in front of the painting, our mother's easel holding the weight of our shared redemption. For the first time, Nathan looked peaceful. He turned to me quietly. I don't expect you to forget, Isabel. I just hope someday you'll remember me as more than what I did. I met his gaze. I already do. He nodded, his throat tightening. Thank you. Before he left that evening, he paused by the door. Do you think she'd be proud of us? I smiled faintly, glancing toward the painting. She already is. He hesitated, then gave me something I hadn't seen from him in years, a genuine, fragile smile. Goodbye, Isabel. Goodbye, Nathan. As the door closed behind him, I felt the quiet settle again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was calm, like the air after a storm. I turned back to the painting, studying the two bands of light on the water, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice again. Forgive him, Isabel, because one day you'll both need the same grace. That night, I wrote in her journal the one she'd left me. My handwriting trembled as I penned the final entry. He came back. He looked like a man who'd walked through his own shadow. But in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, Hope. The kind that can't be stolen. I closed the book and placed it beside the finished painting. The next morning, sunlight poured through the studio window, landing perfectly on the lake we'd painted together. The light broke twice, and I finally understood what my mother had been trying to teach us all along. The true inheritance wasn't the estate, or the money, or even the justice, it was the courage to forgive, and the peace that follows when you finally do. 5 years later, the lake still shimmered the same way it had that day, two bands of light dancing across its surface. But everything else had changed. The old Corwin estate was no longer a house. It had become something gentler, a small art gallery and foundation called Lydia's Light. The rooms where my mother once painted now held her works, along with those of young artists who couldn't afford to show anywhere else. Every corner smelled faintly of paint and lavender, just as she'd left it. People often ask me how it all began, and every time I'd smile and say, with a letter. They never quite understood what that meant, but they didn't need to. The lake painting, the one Nathan and I had finished together, hung in the center room. A single golden spotlight illuminated it. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Where the Light Breaks Twice" by Lydia Corwin, completed by Isabel and Nathan Corwin. Visitors lingered longest there, staring into the colors. I'd often see them tilt their heads, just as Mother used to do. as if trying to find themselves somewhere in the reflection. Henry still visited sometimes, his hair now streaked with more silver than before. "You've done well," he told me one evening, standing beside the painting. "Your mother would have loved this place." I smiled. "She built it, Henry. I just turned the lights back on." He chuckled softly. "And Nathan?" The question hung in the air. I hadn't seen Nathan in almost 3 years. After that night in the studio, he'd disappeared again, this time by choice. But he hadn't vanished completely. Every few months, I'd receive a letter. The first had been angry, the second, apologetic, the third, quiet, each one softer than the last, as though he was learning how to speak honestly again. I never wrote back, not because I didn't care, but because I knew he was finding his own way, just as I had found mine. That night, as I closed the gallery and stepped outside, the sky was painted in the same hues as Mother's favorite palette rose gold, pale lilac, and soft gray. The breeze off the lake carried a faint smell of rain and earth. The postman, an older man named Thomas, was locking up his bike at the corner. He waved when he saw me. "Evening, Miss Corwin. Got something for you." He handed me a small envelope, the handwriting instantly recognizable Nathan's. I took it inside, my heart beating just a little faster. The letter wasn't long. His handwriting was uneven, as if written slowly, carefully. "Isabel, it's been some time. I thought I could rebuild my life by running from the pieces I broke, but that was foolish. I've learned that you can't outrun truth. It walks beside you until you turn around and face it. I've been teaching art to children at a small community center up north. I tell them about light and shadow, how the two need each other to make something beautiful." I think Mother would have smiled at that. "I saw an article about Lydia's light last month. The photo of the painting. It took my breath away. You finished it perfectly. I wanted you to know I've kept one of Mother's old brushes, the one with the chipped handle. I don't use it, I just keep it close. If you'll let me, I'd like to visit one day. Not as the man I was, but as your brother. Nathan." I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. It wasn't redemption. It was something quieter. A reaching out. I looked toward the painting, glowing softly in the evening light, and felt a familiar warmth spread through me. The next morning, I framed the letter and placed it near the entrance under a small sign that read, "Letters of Light." Visitors began leaving notes beside it, messages of forgiveness, hope, love, and loss. Within weeks, that wall became the heart of the gallery. Each letter different, each one breaking light in its own way. Months later, I received another envelope, this one with a return address. I smiled, recognizing the town. It was only 2 hours north. And that's how it happened quietly, without ceremony. Nathan came back. He arrived one early autumn afternoon, standing outside the gallery in a worn jacket, holding a bouquet of daisies. When our eyes met through the glass door, I felt something shift, like time folding gently back into place. He looked older, but lighter. The weight he once carried had softened into something almost peaceful. When he stepped inside, he glanced around the gallery, awe flickering in his eyes. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's home," I replied. We stood before the painting together again, the one that started it all. "You remember," he said quietly, "how we couldn't get the reflection right. The light kept splitting wrong." I smiled. "It wasn't wrong. We just hadn't learned what it meant yet." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You always saw what I couldn't." I turned toward him, my voice gentle. "And now you do." He blinked, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Isabel, for not hating me." "I never hated you," I said. "I just waited for you to come home." The gallery grew quiet as the sun began to set. its light bending through the tall windows and landing perfectly across the painting, breaking twice, just as before. Nathan looked up at it, smiling faintly. "She's here," he whispered. "Yes," I said. She never really left. Outside, the last light of day rippled across the water, golden and soft. People often said the reflection looked like two paths meeting at the horizon. But to me, it looked like forgiveness finding its way home. That evening, before locking up, Nathan and I stood outside the gallery, watching the lamps flicker on. The town was quiet, the air calm. He looked at me one last time and said, "You turned our story into something worth telling." I smiled, feeling my mother's presence in every breath. "No, Nathan," I whispered. "We did." And as he walked toward the fading sunset, I opened the gallery door one last time, letting the light spill across the velour. Inside, the lake painting shimmered as though alive, the two reflections dancing together, truth and love, shadow and grace. And in that moment, I realized the story was never about inheritance at all. It was about the kind of legacy that can't be taken, only shared. 10 years later, the lake still looked the same. But everything else had softened. Time has a way of turning sharp edges into curves, pain into memory, and loss into something gentler. The gallery had grown. Lydia's light now had two new wings, one for local artists and another dedicated entirely to letters. Hundreds of handwritten notes lined the walls. Confessions, apologies, dreams, even goodbyes. People came from across the country to read them, to add their own, or simply to sit and feel seen. I often wandered there in the mornings when the air was still and the light was soft enough to make everything look like a watercolor. The smell of paper and old wood reminded me of my mother's studio. The same quiet hum of creation, the same warmth beneath the silence. Nathan's letters still came, though now they were less about regret and more about life. He'd opened his own community art center near the coast. The photos he sent showed him smiling with children, paint on his hands, and joy in his eyes. In every letter, he'd include a small sketch, a wave, a bird, a fragment of light. We'd long since stopped talking about the past. It didn't belong to us anymore. It belonged to the lesson we'd learned and to the peace we'd both found. This morning, though, felt different. The sun was brighter than usual, spilling across the floor in long ribbons of gold. I opened my mother's old journal once more, the pages worn soft from years of turning, and read her final words again. Love will outlive the will. I traced the letters with my fingertips, feeling that same quiet power I'd felt the first time I found them. How simple those words were, and how deeply they had changed everything. The bell above the gallery door chimed. I turned to see a young woman standing hesitantly near the entrance. She looked barely 20, her hair pulled back, a small portfolio clutched to her chest. "Miss Corwin?" she asked softly. I wrote to you last month about the scholarship." I smiled, recognizing the name. "Clara, yes, you came from Bristol, didn't you?" She nodded, shy but determined. "I wanted to show you something." She opened her portfolio carefully, revealing a painting unfinished but beautiful. A landscape, the sky breaking in two directions, light glancing off a lake. I stared for a moment, a quiet awe blooming in my chest. "That's lovely," I said. "What inspired it?" "My mother," she said softly. She used to tell me that truth and love always find each other like a light reflecting twice. My breath caught. I smiled faintly, trying to steady my voice. "That's something my own mother used to say." Clara looked up, surprised. "Really?" I nodded. "Maybe some words never stop traveling. They just wait for the right heart to find them again." Her eyes brightened. I hope I can show this piece in your gallery one day. You will, I said, when it's ready. She smiled, then left the studio quietly, leaving behind a soft echo of possibility. I stood there for a long time, gazing at her painting still on the table. The reflection on the water, so young, so full of hope, looked like a continuation of everything that had come before. I walked to the window, looking out at the lake beyond the trees. The afternoon sun shimmered across it, two clear bands of light breaking over the surface, just as they always had. Behind me, in the gallery, Henry's voice called out. He was older now, but still sharp, still steady. They want you downstairs, Isabel. There's a group of students here for the workshop. Coming, I called back. Before I left, I turned once more toward the painting Nathan and I had finished years ago. It hung in its same place, framed by light, its colors still alive. I thought of him then, of how far we'd both come. The last letter he sent had arrived 2 weeks ago. It was short, just a few lines. The sea looks like the lake today. The light still breaks twice. I think she'd be proud of us, Isabel. Nathan. I'd placed it beneath the painting, tucked discreetly beside our mother's plaque. I liked to think visitors sometimes noticed it, even if they didn't read it. As I descended the stairs to the workshop room, laughter drifted up to meet me, the sound of brushes clinking, voices eager to learn. Dozens of young faces turned toward me, hopeful, curious, ready to create. One little girl, freckles dusting her nose, raised her hand. Miss Corwin, how do you know when a painting is finished? The question made me smile. I thought of my mother, of the studio, of the letter, the courtroom, the forgiveness, the light. When it stops asking for more, I said gently, and starts giving something back? The girl nodded seriously, and I felt my throat tighten. As the children began to paint, I walked among them quietly, the sound of rain beginning to patter softly against the roof. And then I saw it, one child's small canvas. A lake, the light breaking twice. I stopped, smiling through tears I hadn't expected. Where did you learn to paint that? I asked. She shrugged, dabbing her brush into blue paint. My grandma told me about it. She said there's always more than one kind of truth in a reflection. I closed my eyes briefly, breathing in the scent of paint and rain, and felt something warm settle deep in my chest. When I opened them again, I whispered quietly to her, to the children, to the air itself. She was right. That night, as the gallery lights dimmed and the last visitors left, I sat by the window overlooking the lake, journal open on my lap. I wrote one final entry. Mother, you were right. Love has outlived everything, anger, pride, loss. Nathan found his peace. I found mine, and your light. It still breaks twice, every day. I signed my name, closed the book, and placed it beside the window. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the moonlight, two bright reflections rippling across the surface, steady and eternal. And in that moment, the story of the Corwin family finally rested. Not in wealth, not in victory, but in forgiveness. Years slipped by quietly after that. Seasons came and went like pages, turning, and Lydia's light became more than a gallery. It became a living memory. Artists, dreamers, and wanderers came to that place, drawn not by fame, but by the calm hum of something deeper. Love surviving time. I grew older, but the lake never did. It still gleamed beyond the willow trees, the light breaking twice as if to remind me that truth and love still walked together. Nathan and I continued to write, though less frequently. His letters arrived every few months, filled not with guilt now, but with stories. Stories of the children he taught, of the joy he'd found in simplicity, of the way art had mended the fractures he once thought were permanent. In one letter he wrote, "Sometimes, when I paint, I imagine her behind me, not watching, guiding. I think we're all still standing in that studio in one way or another." I kept that letter folded in my pocket for weeks. By the time I turned 70, my hands had begun to tremble. I couldn't paint much anymore, but I still came to the gallery every morning. The children who once attended my workshops now brought their own students. The laughter still filled those rooms. One afternoon, as I sat near the lake with my tea, Henry joined me. He was in his 80s now, his movements slow, but his eyes still sharp as ever. "You've built something remarkable, Isabel," he said quietly. I smiled. "It built itself, Henry. I just kept the doors open." He chuckled softly. "That's what you always say. But you know, she'd be proud, Lydia. You turned her story into a light that never goes out." I looked toward the water. "It's funny," I murmured. "At first, I thought all she left behind was pain. But now I see she left lessons disguised as loss." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "And forgiveness disguised as justice." I smiled faintly. "Yes, she always saw further than we did." A silence fell between us, warm and easy. Then, as if remembering something, Henry reached into his coat pocket and handed me an envelope. "This came for you this morning from Nathan." My heart fluttered. The handwriting was shakier now, but still familiar. I opened it carefully. "Dear Isabel, I've been feeling my years lately. The doctors say my heart is tired, though I like to think it's just full. I don't know how many more paintings I'll finish, but every time I hold a brush, I still see the lake. I wanted you to know that I'm at peace, truly. And I want to thank you for not letting my worst moment become the end of my story. I'm proud of us, Isabel, of what we became. If you ever look at the painting and the light breaks twice, know that I'm there too, somewhere in the reflection. With love, Nathan." I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, reading the words again and again until the sun began to dip behind the trees. Then, quietly, I whispered, "Goodbye, Nathan." That evening, I placed his letter beside my mother's journal on the table near the lake painting. They looked right together, two stories meeting in peace. The next morning, I received another envelope. This one wasn't from Nathan, it was from his assistant. He had passed away 2 nights before. The letter was kind, gentle. He'd gone in his sleep, paint still on his hands. His last canvas, they said, had been a lake under a twilight sky, the light breaking twice. I closed my eyes, the ache inside me both sharp and tender. That night, I dreamed of him. We were back in the studio, the smell of turpentine and rain in the air. He stood beside me, young again, smiling. Our mother was there too, painting, her laughter echoing softly. And as the dream faded, she turned toward me and said, "It's finished, Isabel." When I awoke, morning light was spilling across the floor. I sat for a long time just watching it, 2 distinct beams falling through the window, breaking twice. I rose slowly, my steps steady despite the years, and walked to the painting one last time. It glowed in the light, alive and eternal. I ran my fingertips along the edge of the frame. "Goodbye, Mother," I whispered. "Goodbye, Nathan." That afternoon, I began writing my final letter. My handwriting was slower now, but clear. To whoever finds this, know that this gallery was born out of love, not perfection, but forgiveness. If you ever feel lost, look for the light that breaks twice. It means truth and love are still here, waiting for you to notice. Keep painting, keep forgiving. Isabel Corwin. I sealed it and placed it beneath the painting, beside the others. Days passed quietly. Then one evening, as the sun set over the lake, I closed the gallery for the last time. I sat by the window, her journal open beside me, and smiled as the reflection of the sky danced across the water. It was then that I felt it, a soft warmth, like a hand resting over mine. Not real, but not imagined either. My mother's presence, Nathan's too. And in that quiet stillness, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The lake shimmered, the light broke twice, and peace, true, unshakable peace, settled over everything. When they found me the next morning, I was still seated by the window, the journal open to the final page. The sun had just risen, and on the lake outside, the light reflected perfectly two golden paths meeting at the horizon. Beneath the painting, visitors found 3 letters: Lydia's, Nathan's, and Isabel's. Together, they told the story of a family once divided by greed, but reunited by love. And so, the legend of Lydia's light lived on not as a gallery, but as a reminder that even in the darkest heart, forgiveness can find its reflection. And where the light breaks twice, love remains. 30 years after Isabel Corwin's passing, Lydia's light still stood by the lake, its white stone walls touched by ivy and thyme. Generations had come and gone, yet the gallery remained untouched by the noise of the world outside. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of lavender and linseed oil, just as it had when Isabel herself walked those halls. The painting where the light breaks twice still hung in the same place. The sunlight that streamed through the tall windows struck it at just the right angle every morning, scattering gold and silver across the surface. To anyone who saw it, the reflection seemed alive, like the lake itself had been caught mid-breath. People still came, not only to see the paintings, but to feel something of presence, a peace that words could never quite capture. They came to read the letters. Over the years, Isabel's final message had become the heart of the gallery. Her words, "If you ever feel lost, look for the light that breaks twice," were engraved on a bronze plaque beneath the painting. One rainy afternoon, a young woman named Mara Quinn, an art student from the city, arrived at Lydia's light. She was 21, carrying more questions than answers, her heart weary from a world that never seemed to slow down. The caretaker, an elderly man named Elliot, greeted her with a kind smile. "First time here?" he asked. She nodded. "My grandmother used to tell me about this place," she said. "She said it started with a letter." Elliot chuckled softly. "It did. A few of them, actually. Would you like to see them?" Mara followed him into the center gallery. The light was dim, filtered through the rain-streaked glass. And there, beneath the lake painting, she saw them. 3 framed letters, each yellowed by time but perfectly preserved. The first was Lydia's, elegant and strong. The second, Nathan's, simple and repentant. The third, Isabel's, calm and full of grace. Mara read them all slowly, her fingertips brushing the glass as if touching the past might steady her present. "Forgive him not because he deserves it, but because you do. If you ever feel lost, look for the light that breaks twice." When she looked up, tears glistened in her eyes. "It's like they knew me," she whispered. Elliot smiled softly. "That's what everyone says." He gestured toward a quiet corner of the gallery where a large wooden box stood open. "We call it the living wall. Visitors leave their own letters there, things they never said, or things they wish someone could still hear. We add new ones every month." Mara walked toward the box. Inside, dozens of envelopes lay stacked neatly, tied with ribbons of every color. She picked one at random. The handwriting was careful but trembling. "To my daughter, I never knew how to tell you I was proud of you. I hope you find this one day, and I hope the light still breaks twice." Mara pressed the paper to her chest. When she looked up again, her reflection in the glass seemed to merge with the lake in the painting. For the first time in years, she felt something steady inside her, not answers, but peace. She took out her notebook, sat on the floor by the painting, and began to write. Dear whoever reads this, I came here today searching for inspiration, but I found something better understanding. I think forgiveness is a kind of art. You don't get it right the first time. You layer it like paint. You learn to see the light through the mistakes. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Nathan, for proving that even after we break, love can still make us whole. When she finished, she folded the page carefully and slipped it into the box. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun began to push through the clouds, and for a brief, perfect moment, the light filled the room, breaking twice across the lake painting, just as it had for decades. Elliot turned toward it, his eyes soft with wonder. Every time, he murmured. Right when someone new leaves a letter. Mara stood there, watching the reflection dance. She smiled through her tears, whispering, I think it's them. Maybe it is, Elliot said quietly. Maybe love never really leaves. It just changes the way it stays. As she stepped outside, the air was cool and clean, the smell of wet earth rising from the ground. The lake glistened in the distance, its surface smooth as glass, and in it, two reflections shimmered side by side, gold and silver, light and love. That evening, as the gallery lights dimmed and Elliot closed the doors, the last rays of sun slipped through the windows, touching the 3 framed letters once more. Lydia's voice, though silent, seemed to hum through the walls. Nathan's forgiveness lingered like a faint echo, and Isabel's grace, quiet, eternal, filled the room with warmth. In the decades that followed, people would continue to come. They'd stand before the painting, whispering their own stories to the light, and each time, the reflection would break twice, reminding them in the world that truth, love, and forgiveness are never lost. They only wait to be found again. And on the water, as dusk fell, 3 faint silhouettes seemed to shimmer for just a moment, a mother, a son, and a daughter all standing together in the glow of a sun that never truly set. 50 years later, the story of Lydia's light had become legend. The lake, the painting, the letters, they weren't just art or history anymore. They were symbols. People spoke of the Corwin family as if they were part of a parable about love, forgiveness, and truth that refused to fade. Schools brought students to see the gallery. Newlyweds came to make promises in front of the painting. And every year, on the anniversary of Lydia's death, the local radio played a recording of Isabel's final words from her journal, her voice calm, her tone as gentle as the reflection on water. But this year was different. A documentary crew had come to the gallery, a young filmmaker named Amelia Thorne, and her assistant, Leo Park. They'd spent months collecting interviews, letters, and voice recordings, tracing the Corwin family's story through archives and Old Town records. Their goal was simple: to capture how one family's truth had rippled outward for generations. The gallery was quiet that morning as they unpacked their cameras. Dust floated in the golden air like fragments of memory. Do you feel it? Amelia whispered, her voice reverent. Leo looked up from his tripod. Feel what? She gestured around the room. Peace, like they're still here somehow. Leo smiled faintly. You mean the Corwins? Amelia nodded. Every story leaves echoes. This one just never stopped. She walked slowly toward the centerpiece painting where the light breaks twice. Even after all these decades, the colors hadn't dulled. The surface shimmered as though the lake were breathing. And just as Isabel had written, the morning sun broke across it in two bright streaks, one gold and one silver. Amelia set her camera down, her eyes glistening. "You know, my grandmother used to bring me here when I was little," she said softly. She said her mother was one of Isabel's students. Leo blinked. "So, you're connected to this?" Amelia nodded. "She used to tell me that Isabel taught her how to forgive, even though she never met her in person." She turned toward the painting again. "I think that's why I became a filmmaker, to tell stories that remind people forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing love over memory." They began recording. The camera captured slow, deliberate pans across the gallery. The letters framed beneath the painting, the living wall with thousands of handwritten notes, the faded photograph of Isabel by the window, her eyes soft and wise. Then Amelia stepped in front of the lens and began to narrate. This is the story of a mother who left behind a letter, a brother who lost everything to greed, and a sister who turned pain into peace. They were human, flawed, hopeful, afraid, and yet they built something eternal. This place, Lydia's Light, isn't about inheritance. It's about reflection, how truth, when spoken with love, outlives even the people who carried it. The Corwins are gone, but their light still breaks twice. As she finished, silence filled the room. The crew stood motionless, every lens glinting like another reflection. Then something remarkable happened. A thin beam of sunlight slipped through the clouds outside, cutting through the tall window, striking the painting perfectly. The reflection split again, gold and silver, twin paths dancing across the surface. But this time, the light didn't fade. It lingered, steady and soft, casting faint silhouettes on the wall behind the canvas. Amelia lowered her camera, her voice trembling. "Do you see that?" Leo nodded slowly. "It's like 3 shadows." She stared, and there they were, faint but unmistakable. A woman, her son, and her daughter. The outlines swayed gently, as if greeting the light that found them once more. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Amelia whispered, "Maybe love really does outlive everything?" Leo smiled. "I think it just found a new way to be remembered." They packed up quietly, leaving the gallery just as it had been, serene, timeless. Outside, the air shimmered with the late afternoon glow. The lake rippled under the golden sun, and once again, the light broke twice. Weeks later, the documentary aired. It was called Where the Light Breaks Twice. It became a quiet masterpiece. Viewers wept. Letters flooded the gallery from around the world. People spoke of their own families, their own regrets, their own attempts at forgiveness. The film didn't end with Lydia or Nathan or Isabel. It ended with Amelia's narration over footage of the lake at dusk. Maybe every family carries its own reflection, one of pain, one of love. Maybe our task isn't to erase the first, but to let the second shine through it. Because even when truth hurts, it heals in the same breath. And somewhere, beyond all endings, love still waits where the light breaks twice. That final line became etched in countless hearts. Teachers quoted it, families repeated it, and lovers wrote it into wedding vows. The story of the Corwins, once small, once hidden behind grief, had become a beacon of something greater. Proof that forgiveness could ripple through time like light on water. Long after everyone who remembered them was gone, Lydia's light still stood by the lake. Children laughed under its willow trees, artists still painted by its windows, and every morning as the sun rose, the reflection on the lake broke twice, once for truth, once for love. Inside, the letters remained untouched. Lydia's, Nathan's, Isabel's, their ink faded, but their message eternal. Forgiveness is not the end of pain, Lydia had written once. It's the beginning of peace. Outside, the wind whispered through the willows, carrying her words across the water. And as dawn broke once more, the light found its reflection again, not in wealth, not in legacy, but in love that refused to die. A century after Lydia Corwin's letter was first read aloud in that courtroom, Lydia's light still stood by the lake. The town around it had changed, roads paved, buildings modernized, but the gallery remained untouched, its pale stone walls washed by 100 years of sun and rain. Tourists called it a sanctuary in motionless time. Scholars wrote books about the Corwins, calling them the family that forgave the world. But for those who worked there, it was simpler. It was still just Lydia's light. The caretaker now was a young man named Elias Rowan. He had been raised in the nearby village, and though he had studied art abroad, something had always drawn him back. He'd first visited the gallery as a child, clutching his grandmother's hand, listening to her whisper the old story as though it were a prayer. She said her name was Isabel, she had told him, pointing toward the lake painting. She taught people that love doesn't die. It just changes its shape. That memory had followed Elias his whole life. Now, as he unlocked the doors every morning, he could feel that same invisible warmth lingering in the air like sunlight trapped in old paint. He tended to the letters, dusted the frames, watered the ivy that crept gently along the outer wall, and every morning, without fail, he paused before where the light breaks twice. No matter the weather, the light always seemed to find it. Today was the gallery's centennial commemoration. People from all over the world had come, historians, descendants of visitors, artists who claimed they'd found their calling here. The living wall now contained thousands of letters from over 100 countries. Each one carried the same heartbeat: forgiveness. Elias moved quietly through the crowd, making sure everything was in order. He wore a small silver pin in the shape of two intersecting rays, the symbol of Lydia's light. In the main hall, a group of children stood in front of the painting, listening to their teacher. "Who remembers what the light means?" she asked. A small boy raised his hand. "It means truth and love." "That's right," she said, smiling. "And when they meet, that's when healing begins." Elias stopped to listen, smiling faintly. It always amazed him how a story born from grief had turned into one that taught children how to live gently. He walked over to the display where the 3 original letters were preserved. Time had faded the ink, but the words still carried their quiet strength. Beneath them was Isabel's final journal entry, its last line engraved on a plaque. "Love has outlived everything." He traced the edge of the glass gently. "Still true," he murmured. Behind him, an elderly woman approached. Her gray hair was pinned neatly, her eyes bright and clear despite her years. "You must be Elias," she said warmly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, smiling. "Welcome to Lydia's Light." "I'm Amelia Thorne's granddaughter," she said. She was the filmmaker who made the first documentary about this place. Elias's expression softened. "Then I should thank you." Her work kept the story alive for generations. The woman smiled wistfully. She used to say she didn't just make a film, she finished a prayer. They stood in silence for a moment, the light streaming through the tall windows, glancing across the painting. "Funny," the woman said softly. "Every time I come here, the light always breaks the same way." Elias nodded. "Every morning, every evening, no matter the season." She tilted her head. "Do you ever wonder why?" He smiled. "Maybe it's because love doesn't follow the rules of light." She laughed quietly. "My grandmother would have liked that." Before she left, she handed him a small envelope. She wanted this added to the living wall when the time came. After she left, Elias took the envelope to his desk and opened it carefully. The paper inside was old but well preserved. The handwriting was graceful Amelia's. To those who come after us, we are all reflections of someone else's light. Lydia forgave, Isabel healed, Nathan redeemed. And I remembered. Now it's your turn. When you stand before this painting, don't just look at it. Let it look back at you. If you see yourself there, you've understood everything. Amelia Thorne, Tooth and Eye 75. Elias read it twice, then placed it gently into the living wall with the others. The sun began to set over the lake, the sky rippling with the same soft colors Lydia once loved to paint: amber, lilac, rose gold. Visitors gathered outside for the centennial ceremony. Elias stepped to the podium, his voice steady but full of reverence. 50 years ago, a filmmaker said this place was not about art, but about reflection. 100 years ago, a woman found a letter that changed her life, and before her, a mother's truth restored love to her family. Lydia's light is not a building. It's a reminder that forgiveness doesn't fade with time. It grows, and when truth meets love, when light breaks twice, it becomes something eternal. He paused. We carry that light now. Every one of us. As he stepped back, the crowd turned toward the lake. At that exact moment, as if on cue, the last beam of sunlight pierced the clouds. It struck the surface of the lake, breaking twice 2 bands of light, shimmering like intertwined threads of gold and silver. Gasps rose from the crowd. Children pointed. Adults fell silent. And for just a heartbeat, reflected in the glowing water, 3 faint figures appeared. Lydia, Isabel, and Nathan standing side by side, smiling. The light lingered longer this time, then slowly faded as dusk embraced the lake. Elias whispered to himself, "Where the light breaks twice." The wind rustled through the willows, carrying an answer that only the heart could hear. Love remains. That night, after the crowd had gone and the gallery stood quiet again, Elias walked once more through the empty halls. The moonlight pooled on the floor, soft and silver. He paused before the painting, gazing at its reflection in the window glass. He smiled. Good night, Lydia. Good night, Isabel. Good night, Nathan. The lake shimmered faintly outside, as though responding to his words. And long after he turned off the lights, a pale glow lingered in the gallery just enough to touch the edges of the painting. 2 reflections, 2 rays of truth. 1, endless love. Night settled over Lydia's light like a soft breath. The last visitors were gone, the lamps dimmed, and the world outside hushed itself into stillness. The lake, calm and silver under the moon, seemed to hold its own quiet heartbeat. From the windows, the reflections of the gallery's interior lights trembled faintly across the surface, small, flickering souls suspended between sky and earth. Inside, Elias Rowan moved slowly through the darkened halls, his footsteps soft against the wood. He didn't turn on the lights. He knew this place by memory. Each step carried the scent of paint, the faint trace of time, the lingering warmth of stories that refused to fade. He paused before the great painting where the light breaks twice. Even in the darkness it shimmered, not with light, but with presence. Elias smiled faintly. It's still here, he whispered, still shining. He thought of the lives intertwined with this place, the generations who had come before him. The hands that had built a legacy from grief and gentleness. Lydia, who painted truth with forgiveness. Isabel, who carried that truth through heartbreak and healing. Nathan, who fell and rose again through grace. And all those after them, Amelia, the filmmaker who gave their silence a voice. the children who'd grown under their lessons, the countless strangers who had found themselves reflected in this lake of light. He often wondered what they would think if they could see what their story had become. A century ago, it had been just a family's private ache. Now it was a living testament. He reached up and adjusted the small brass plaque beneath the painting. The words, dulled by age, still gleamed faintly, where the light breaks twice. Lydia, Isabel, and Nathan Corwin Truth. Forgiveness. Love. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, as if drawing in the scent of their memory. Then slowly, he walked to the window. The lake stretched before him, glistening beneath the moonlight. The willow trees swayed gently, whispering through the cool air, and then it happened again. The light, soft at first, then growing two silvery beams crossing over the water, trembling and merging in the reflection. It was so perfect, so familiar, that Elias felt his breath catch. He'd seen it hundreds of times, yet tonight it felt different, like a promise renewing itself. He stepped closer to the window, his voice a murmur. "I see it. You're still here." In that light, it seemed as though the air itself shimmered, and for an instant, the faintest outline of three figures appeared on the lake's surface. Lydia, Isabel, and Nathan. Not ghosts, not illusions, just love given shape by light. They stood side by side, looking out across the water, faces serene. Elias didn't move. He simply bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered, "for leaving us this." The figures began to fade as the light grew softer, melting into the water's ripples. But the peace they left behind filled every inch of the room. He turned away from the window and looked once more at the painting. Even in the faint moonlight, it seemed alive, its colors whispering across the decades. The strokes of Lydia's brush still carried her voice. Isabel's steadiness lived in every layer. Nathan's forgiveness glowed in the reflection they'd painted together. He thought of all the people who had written their own letters and placed them in the living wall. Letters of apology, letters of love, letters that said what words had failed to say while people still lived. Each one, in its own way, had added another brushstroke to this legacy. He whispered, "You didn't just change your story, you changed ours." The wind brushed through the open window, and for a heartbeat, he could swear he heard a voice, soft, familiar, ageless. "Forgive him, Isabel." Then another, steadier. "She already did?" And a third, quiet, young, almost laughing through tears. "Where the light breaks twice, we'll meet again." Elias closed his eyes, smiling through the ache in his chest. He sat down on the old bench facing the lake, the same one where Isabel once wrote in her journal. The wood was smooth from decades of hands and weather, but strong still, like the story it held. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket and began to write. 100 years ago, a mother's hidden letter changed everything. She did not leave behind wealth. She left behind a mirror. In its reflection, her children saw their true selves broken, yes, but capable of love. Forgiveness did not erase what was done, it transformed it. And in that transformation, something eternal was born. He paused, then added one final line. "Even now, when the sun rises over the lake, the light breaks twice. Once for truth, once for love. That is enough." He signed his name, closed the notebook, and placed it beneath the painting, joining it with the hundreds of others that rested there, sealed in time. Outside, the horizon began to glow with the first blush of dawn. The lake stirred under the wind. And just as the sun lifted, the light broke once more across the water, two bands of gold stretching toward each other, until they met. Elias watched, his eyes bright with quiet wonder. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this moment would never truly end. The story would continue carried in new voices, painted in new hands, whispered across new hearts. Because love never stops traveling, it only waits for someone willing to look long enough to see it reflected back. And as the light rose higher, the world seemed to breathe again, gentle, whole, and forgiven. Later that morning, visitors would come and marvel at the painting. Children would press their palms against the window, watching the light break twice. Artists would sketch. Teachers would explain. Lovers would whisper promises. None of them would know that in the still hours before dawn, the caretaker had seen what they could only feel. The story had come full circle. The legacy complete. But the light went on. Final lines, epilogue. Where truth meets love, time stands still. Where the light breaks twice, forgiveness begins again. And somewhere beyond reflection, Lydia, Isabel, and Nathan still walk beside the lake hand in hand, forever illuminated by the love they left behind. The lake is quiet tonight. The wind moves softly through the willows, the same way it always has. The air tastes of rain and memory, and though years have folded into centuries, I can still feel the world breathing slow, tender, alive. I am not gone. None of us are. We live in the spaces between reflection and light, where truth meets forgiveness and becomes something eternal. When the sun rises over Lydia's light, I watch from beyond the veil. The children come running through the courtyard, laughter like the music my mother used to hum while she painted. Their small hands press against the window, their eyes wide with wonder as the morning light touches the lake. They point and their voices rise together. Look, the light breaks twice. And I smile because they see it. They feel what we left behind. Mother was right. Love doesn't fade when the heart stops beating. It travels, it transforms, it waits. Every letter left in that wall, every tear, every word of apology whispered into the air, it becomes part of us. We hear them all. Nathan stands beside me now, as he often does. He no longer carries guilt in his eyes. He laughs easily, sometimes quietly, sometimes the way he used to when he was young. He paints again. Too, only now, the sky never runs out of color. Mother is here too, though not always in form. Sometimes she is the light itself, glancing off the water like a whisper. Sometimes she is the warmth that touches a visitor's cheek when they read her letter and finally let go of something heavy. And me, I am simply the voice that remembers. When I look down at Lydia's light, I no longer see a gallery or a building. I see a bridge between the living and the remembering, between truth and grace. I see how forgiveness keeps the world from unraveling. It begins quietly. A letter written but never sent, a conversation finally had, a heart choosing peace over pride. That's how love begins again. Always. To the ones who come after us, you will stumble, you will fall, you will hurt, but do not close your heart when the world turns cold. Look toward the light and wait. Because no matter how dark it gets, it will break through again. Twice. Once for truth, once for love. And in that space between them, you'll find everything that ever mattered. I was once a woman who lost everything to deceit. I thought pain was the end of my story. But now, from this quiet shore beyond time, I see it was only the beginning. Because what I gained the understanding that love can forgive even the unforgivable has no end. So if you ever stand by the lake and the wind brushes your cheek and the light breaks across the water, know this: we are still here. We always Will be, where the light breaks twice.